Queen Elizabeth II was queen from February 6, 1952 until September 8, 2022, making her the longest reigning British monarch in history. While the political landscape both in the United Kingdom and the world underwent drastic changes during her reign, Elizabeth II remained a popular monarch and was much beloved throughout the world. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary was born on April 21, 1926 at 17 Bruton Street in London, England. At the time, her grandfather King George V was King of the United Kingdom and her father was the Duke of York. This made young Elizabeth a princess. Growing up, Elizabeth went by the nickname, Lilibet. As a princess of the United Kingdom, Elizabeth lived a pampered life. She was educated by private tutors at home and enjoyed riding horses at her family's country home in Windsor Great Park. Her younger sister, Princess Margaret, was born in 1930 and her family was close. However, Elizabeth was not a spoiled child. Many adults who came into contact with her commented on how mature and grounded she was even at a young age. Everything changed for Elizabeth in 1936. First, her beloved grandfather, King George V, died and her uncle became King Edward VIII. Elizabeth was now second in line to the throne after her father. However, it wasn't really expected that she would be queen. Her uncle Edward would likely have children and one of them would assume the crown. Then, the truly unexpected happened. King Edward abdicated the crown and her father became king. Now Elizabeth was next in line to the throne. As the future queen, life for 10-year-old Elizabeth took a dramatic turn. She now had to prepare to lead the country and her every move was chronicled and scrutinized by the public and the press. Young Elizabeth dealt with the pressure expertly. She had grown up with a strong sense of duty and had a strong bond with her parents to fall back on when needed. The years between becoming the heir apparent to the throne and becoming queen were marked by three major events: World War II, her marriage, and the birth of her first two children. When World War II began in 1939, it was suggested that the Queen, Elizabeth's mother, flee England and go to Canada. However, her mother refused to leave the king. Elizabeth, along with her sister and mother, did leave the city of London, however. They spent much of the war at Windsor Castle. Elizabeth gave her first radio broadcast in 1940 on the BBC's Children's Hour. She also took an honorary position in the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the women's branch of the British Army, where she trained as a mechanic and driver. Elizabeth was 8 years old when she first met her future husband Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. She was only 13 when she proclaimed she had fallen in love with him. The two began to exchange letters and later began to court in secret as they didn't want the press to be hounding them. They announced their engagement in July of 1947 and were married in Westminster Abbey on November 20, 1947. Their wedding was an international event with millions of people listening to the BBC broadcast around the world. The young married couple had their first child, Prince Charles, around a year later. They would go on to have a total of 4 children: Charles, Anne, Andrew, and Edward. In the early 1950s, Elizabeth's father became ill with lung cancer. As his condition worsened, Elizabeth was forced to take on some of the duties of the British monarch. In 1952, she was visiting Kenya while filling in for her father on a state visit when she got the news that her father had passed. On February 6, 1952, Elizabeth acceded to the throne as Queen of the United Kingdom and all the Commonwealth's realms. After assuming the role of monarch, Elizabeth headed home to meet with Winston Churchill, the current British Prime Minister. She chose the regnal name of Elizabeth and would be known as Elizabeth II. After a year of mourning for her father, her coronation occurred on June 2, 1953. Elizabeth's coronation was a massive affair and was televised worldwide in 39 different languages. Elizabeth was still a young lady of 25 years when she was crowned queen. She had a husband and 2 young children. She would go on to have 2 more children while queen. She dearly loved her husband and family life was important to her. As one might expect, it was nearly impossible to have a normal family life as Queen of Britain, but Elizabeth did her best. While the Queen was technically the head of state of the British government, she seldom got involved in politics. Queen Elizabeth II was being very careful throughout her reign to stay out of politics and little is actually known about her political views. Early in her reign, she appointed the Prime Minister to form a government from the Conservative Party. Her first appointment was Harold Macmillan in 1957 and the second was Alec Douglas Home in 1963. In later years, the political parties adopted their own ways to select the Prime Minister. Despite not being directly involved in politics from a public standpoint, Queen Elizabeth met with the Prime Minister once a week. During these audiences, the Prime Minister updated the Queen on government issues and matters of state. In the early part of her reign, Prime Ministers such as Winston Churchill offered advice to the young Queen. Later in her reign, the Queen likely offered advice to the Prime Minister drawing from her years of experience. As Prime Minister David Cameron once said, she has, literally heard it all before. Throughout her reign, Queen Elizabeth II has travelled the world extensively. She is one of the most widely travelled heads of state in world history and has visited over 130 countries. In the 1970s she was particularly busy when she took 73 trips and visited 48 different countries. The country she has visited the most is Canada. Despite her long reign and many years in the public eye, little is known about the personal feelings or politics of the Queen. She rarely gives interviews and is very formal when in public. One thing we do know, she is fully committed to the duties of her position. She has always worked hard to represent her country and the royal family in the best way possible. Elizabeth's private interests included horses, dogs, particularly Welsh corgis, and Scottish country dancing. She began riding horses at the age of 6 and became an accomplished rider by her teens. She took a strong interest in breeding horses and owning racing thoroughbred horses. Her love for corgis started when she was a young girl and continued throughout her reign. 3 of her corgis, Monty, Willow, and Holly, appeared with James Bond in the opening ceremony of the 2012 Olympics. She served as the longest-serving British monarch for over 70 years, presiding over continual change both within the royal family, Great Britain and the Commonwealth. Despite passing 90 years, she remained in relatively good health and continued to serve. Elizabeth II passed away on the 8th of September 2022, causing an outpouring of love and good wishes for her unique reign and life of duty and service. Her funeral at Westminster Abbey on the 19th of September attracted heads of state from around the world. It was the first state funeral since Winston Churchill, and huge crowds came to see her final journey to Windsor Castle, where she was buried next to her husband Prince Philip.